Hello, you beautiful degenerates, and welcome to Links and Locks, the Action Network's golf betting podcast. We are back not previewing a tournament this weekend, but instead the President's Cup, where the international team will take on Team USA at Royal Montreal Golf Club in Montreal, Canada. It's a road game for Team USA. The USA has dominated the President's Cup historically. Today on our show, we're going to jump into Royal Montreal. Spencer will get us going with the course preview. And then after that, we'll talk a little bit of the format of the President's Cup in case you're not familiar, because we need to make sure everybody's on the same page, what we're optimizing for. And then after that, we'll get into our bets. We got a few that we really like, and we're excited to break them down with you. We've had some success on the President's Cup and some of these team events. Last year, we were all on the European team in the Ryder Cup. The year before, we had some exposure to Jordan Spieth, top point scorer, which I believe he won 5-0. So hopefully we can keep it rolling this week in Canada. But Spencer, I'll sling it to you. How are you modeling Royal Montreal Golf Club this week?
So I guess for me, it came down to when I was trying to figure out the optimal way to do this of how I thought the international side would put this course out there to give themselves the best chance to win. There are some unknown variables. There are some things that we're finding out about the week. The rough doesn't look very penal to me, but what I noticed, and I thought this was a very interesting takeaway that I had. So when you normally look at these American teams, you always get these squads that I would say have massive total driving upside. That includes the propensity to be longer off the tee than their opponents. If you're the international group here and you kind of just take every single old American team and look at it that way, that kind of you should technically build a course that mitigates a lot of those upside totals that I just talked about. Veer against bomb and gouge. That's typically your best bet. But when I ran my data here, there are very specific paths that the international group has to go with if they want to find success. And for me, one of them actually was to allow distance to play a factor. Let the 71 bunkers and 6 holes with water accentuate those strengths for them. Like this to me from the international side was a team that had total driving almost across the board. And then this ebb and flow between different players to where you have a couple good putters, you have some good long iron players. Most of the guys that do one of those things well doesn't do the other one well. But when I talk about this driving statistic that I kept finding over and over again, my model thought the internationals had 4 of the 6 longest drivers, 10 of the 17 best total drivers, and then 9 of the 17 best players when you are approaching the green from a missed fairway. So essentially that pushed me in my model. And unfortunately, in this situation, Roberto, like we talk about course breakdowns quite often. What I think is the optimal path here doesn't necessarily matter. Like, I'll give you like the prime example here. I actually like Russell Henley for this course. I know I've talked about distance and all that, and that's not necessarily the Russell Henley blueprint there, but if Russell Henley is not in the game plan for enough matches, all of a sudden you run into this tricky situation to where I don't know if he actually can be the top point scorer for the American team. And that's something that we can discuss later. I kind of have some takes in those areas, but I thought when you were trying to figure out the optimal path here for the internationals, aside from the total driving, you can't have this become a putting contest. I know you're going to have the low end of the answer of Finau and Scheffler, the high end options for the internationals like Scott and Hughes, but that best ball format remains, I would say, a massive problem for the international side just because of the overall upside and the birdie making that the USA possesses in any situation. You could probably talk about that for any course. You're going to get that at the end of the day here, but the alternate shot format is really for me where you can kind of have an advantage if you build this the right way. There are combinations, and I don't know which way Mike Weir is going to go about it with his roster construction, but like for me, if you throw Corey Connors with Adam Scott, all of a sudden you have this really strong duo together for alternate shots. So a lot of this is going to come down to how they want to set up the course every single day, how they want to go about things. But we'll talk about this a little bit more as we speak about best bets, optimal ways and ways to look into lineups for whether that's DFS or the betting market. But the unknown variables here do hold a little bit of a question mark that we have every single go around. But I at least for myself personally here, I think this is a little bit closer than the public tends to think this is. There is this deviation in my math, and I'll talk about it for a USA bet that I like, but there's home course narratives. There's this thing that I ran in my model where there are certain optimal combinations for each squad, and when the United States rolls out certain players, it hurts their win equity from the longevity of this tournament as we move forward. So it's going to have to be a very precise weekend for the international squad to get across the finish line. But, there is a path here that isn't the 0% that if you hear everybody talk about this, that it's going to be 100% a runaway. I don't necessarily fall under that mentality here.
Just looking at the course, Spencer, a couple things that stood out to me. It's a par 70, just over 7,400 yards. Only 2 par 5s. Those were on hole 6 and hole 12. There are 4 par 3s. They are all on odd numbered holes 5, 7, 13, and 17. So in foursomes, also known as alternate shot, you're going to need to be very strategic with which golfer you pick to tee off on the first hole, because that golfer will be teeing off on all the par 3s. And in theory, that's where you'd want your elite iron player to be teeing off. And then there are tight landing areas. Average fairway width in the landing area is 26 to 30 yards, which is tighter than the PGA Tour average. The rough should be relatively thick for the size or the height of it. The height is listed on the GCSAA fact sheet as to be determined. They had a super wet August where they struggled to cut the rough, so you'd think that it should be relatively thick. Again, we'll see how long it is, and you would assume it's going to be patchy in certain areas. I think that driving accuracy is going to be more important than driving distance this week, especially because there aren't those par 5s. And there are 2 par 4s between 370 and 410 yards, I believe. And so I believe it's number 14 or 15 that is just over 400 yards on the scorecard, but it can be played as drivable. It'll be interesting to see if they play that as drivable or if they even want it to be drivable, depending on who they're trotting out there any given day. But the home team, the international team, gets to pick the course. So that's already one big factor that's been decided. And they also get to set the course. And I think those are huge advantages. And of course, it's a home game. They have the support of the fans nearby. The Canadians will be getting after it. We know the Canadians can support a tournament. We've seen it the last few years at the Canadian Open, which has been awesome. I expect a really great showing from the Maple Leafs this week, and I think that's going to play a role in the competition. We saw the USA really struggle with it last year in Rome. Perhaps they'll be a little bit more experienced having gone through that last year, even though it wasn't a positive experience. I think there are a lot of really interesting factors at play this week. And once again, as far as turf goes, there's a bent POA mix just about everywhere. And then there's a Kentucky bluegrass rough, which exact length will be determined, but in the 4-inch range, most likely. Nick, anything else that stands out to you about the golf course this week?
I wanted to get your guys' opinion on sand save percentage. I feel like just looking at the overall bird's eye view of this course, looks like you don't even have to hit a bad shot to end up in the bunker. It can just be bad luck, especially, because we don't really know like the actual surface, if it's going to be firm with all the rain and everything that's been coming in. But that's something that I've been looking at, and Spencer touched on it right away. Russell Henley, we just got to get that out in the open, that some of us on the show are probably interested in him, and he ranks second in sand save percentage in 2024 and first in my model for this tournament, obviously. So wanted to get your opinion there. Obviously a guy like Russell Henley, with how elite his just directional strip ball striking is, I think that's someone that could avoid it. But if he's in there a lot, I feel like this is also like plays to his strength, and he had the best putting season of his PGA career by a mile this year. So I'm also concerned with, I guess, how much are they actually going to run him out there? But if he gets hot on day one, I feel like this is the perfect course for him, despite the distance issues.
I guess I'll take this first. This is a very deep, heavily bunkered course throughout. It's heavily bunkered around the greens, and it's heavily bunkered off the tee. There are places where you cannot miss. There are carries that are going to be too long for some players, that if you go in that direction, you probably end up in the bunker. There's water that comes into play also. It's a very difficult closing stretch of a course. Um, I do think though, from like a total driving answer of this, it's, in my opinion, a little bit more wide open just because you do have the ability to bomb and gouge to a slight extent. The bunkers that come into play there, and to answer your question, Nick, I have a pretty substantial weight in sand save numbers in general, whether that be out of fairway bunkers for GIRs hit, greens and regulations hit there, or if you miss a green in regulation and you get stuck in one of these deep, heavily bunkered areas, how are you able to get up and down from that situation? So, this is a really interesting course, and I don't think it's getting enough credit in the space from what I've heard early in the week. I keep talking about this total driving answer of how it does kind of push in the direction of the international side. And you would expect that to be the case. If they're able to pick the course, they're not going to make it the most optimal build that we could get for the American side here. But I think as the more that this turns into a putting contest, and as I said, I understand that you have some of these international players like Mackenzie Hughes and Adam Scott that are pristine putters that can hold their own, but there are a lot of names on the bottom of this list, Corey Connors being one of them, to where if you can turn this a little bit more into a ball striking venue, Siwoo Kim falls into that mentality. That's their path for victory. It's how can we use our driver to an advantage if people are going to be missing, which is going to come into play here just because it is so difficult to hit, as Roberto's talked about. How do you approach from out of these fairway bunkers? How do you approach from out of this rough? I see rough right now that I don't know the stickiness that we're going to get from it. It was a lot shallower in the length that I thought we were going to get. And that's early videos. Let's see where we're at as the week goes on, as we get a little bit more insight into not one or two people standing in an area and saying, oh, there's not much rough here. Like I think there's different holes in different situations to come into play. But at least from the early look, it doesn't look to be, in my opinion, as penal as I thought it was going to be. And I actually think that's a positive for the international side.
Want to know a couple other things. First off, the green size is 5,000 square feet, so relatively small, not a ton of greens or average greens on the PGA Tour, smaller than that. And then just going through the course tour right now, every single hole has at least one bunker green side, and there are quite a few fairway bunkers as well. Most often short right, short left. And then one other thing to watch out for is the front nine is a very Parkland style golf course, not a ton of water coming into play. But on the back nine, there's a lot more water, especially on the last 5 holes in particular. I would think that maybe if somebody's not super accurate with the driver and they're getting away with it, emphasis on getting away with it, because you need to have value. And if guys are already way behind and getting blown out, there's not going to be value on the number. But if you can find a spot where somebody's missing it right, and there's going to be water coming into play on the tee shot, that player is going to have to hit specifically an alternate shot. That might be a way to target sometime down the road on the back nine. For 4-ball or best ball, as it's more commonly known, I wouldn't be trying to get cute trying to play those games, because you got 2 players in play, and there's just more that can go the other way. Spencer, let's jump into our bets. What was the first bet you made this week?
I'm going to give this as a 2-part wager because this is the way that I put it in. I was trying to create my own range of this wager. I didn't see it available. And maybe a book will add it as the week goes on, but I bet the USA to win by 1 to 3 points at plus 380. And then I also bet them to win between 4 to 6 points at a number that was also plus 380. If you do the math there, that essentially equates to a plus 140 wager. One of those examples is guaranteed to lose, but I'm looking for this to be, as I keep kind of talking about, more hotly contested than the public tends to believe in this spot. If you can give me this range of 1 to 6 points here, I thought there was an opportunity for the international squad to hold their own. And I normally don't get as exact as I'm going to get on the mathematical breakdown here. I know that sometimes when you dive deep into the numbers here and you get to like the exact decimal point of what you're looking for, it convolutes the process a little bit. But there are a couple key variables that I want to point out for why I thought there was value in this wager. So I ran my model 2 ways. I simulated it both ways here. The first way, I would call it a non-optimal consideration of teams. So that essentially is just going to mean that for the most part, and I'll touch on it in a second, but any random player could get selected for a partnership, with the one caveat that it didn't randomly leave out two random golfers, such as like Scheffler and Schauffele. I wanted to make sure that they were paired in every situation. The goal of this was not to see what happens when Scheffler is not playing on the day. The goal of this was, let's just run this in a non-optimal sense. We know what the American squad is going to do a lot more than the international team, and you can kind of go through and figure out what a lot of those teams are going to be. But when I ran it that way, there was an expected win expectation from points of 4.2 points that the USA was favored by. So I want everybody to keep that in mind for 1 second. Obviously, I have the 1 to 6 points here that I've talked about. The second way I ran the data included each team producing what my model deemed to be the optimal lineup, with the caveat there that we know we're getting Scheffler and Burns. We know we're getting Xander and Cantlay. I know I'm getting Morikawa and somebody in these spots. I don't know exactly who. There's a lot of options to who he could get paired with, whether they put him with Finau, they go with the Cal connection with Homa, which I think we might be off of at this point with the way that Homa's playing. But I was able to figure out what the optimal builds were in this situation. And it's really difficult to not run an optimal lineup and to not see the USA climb substantially over those numbers. They are the better team on paper. There's a reason why they are the favorites to win this. They jump all the way up to a projected 6.84 point advantage. So 4.2 when it's not optimal, 6.84 when it is optimal. That kind of puts you in this weird spot here between the 1 and the 6 that I'm talking about. But the one thing I noticed, and I talked about this even during the course breakdown answer, there are certain players on this USA squad, and a lot more USA players than the international players, that every single time that they got put into a build, the projected win total, or the point total, I should say, that the USA would get went down. So that would be players like, we are high on Sahith Theegala. My model didn't love him here, though. Max Homa, I talked about him just a second ago. Brian Harman, I'm sure you're happy to hear that one, Nick, that Harman is somebody that I'm not on this week. And then Keegan Bradley would be the other one. So I thought you had this situation here where there are the 6 best players in my model for the USA squad. But then when you run the following 11 names, there were only 2 USA players that actually graded in that next range of participants of the top 17 golfers. So what I ended up seeing in my model is you have the high-end answer, which makes sense of why the USA gets better there. But then you get this downside of the answer of where every single time those 4 players end up teeing it up. And there's technically some problems with Finau in my model. You give him the right partner, and I think it's like less of an issue. Morikawa is a really good fit for him. Like, that is probably the optimal partner he could have. I think Russell Henley also carries a lot of positivity if they put him with Finau. But the thing with the international squad that I really liked is that for best ball, there was a lot of total driving that worked for all the players there. Like, no matter who you throw in there or you don't throw in there, there wasn't really this deviation in expectation. You don't want to leave Sungjae sitting on the bench. Like, your team gets worse if you do that. But you're also in this spot where I didn't see a massive difference from top to bottom. And then all of a sudden, when we head to alternate shot now, we get this answer that comes into play where I kind of talked about, where you can mix and match, where there's a lot of good total drivers on that team, where you can find good approach players and pair them with a good putter, vice versa on these answers. Like, there's a lot of ways to build it. So I think this is going to be closer than the expectation is. I say the USA wins this between 1 and 6 points at plus 140. Thought there was a little bit of value in that number. And really what I'm hoping for here is that the USA squad just rolls out enough suboptimal pairings to where this stays closer. And then you're going to have that Sunday singles problem to where that is where it really push comes to shove. And they're going to have to hold their own, the international side, to not turn this into a blowout. But I think there's enough quality on this other side that they keep it between 1 and 6 points.
I like it. I think that's a really savvy way of going about it. And if you look at the US, they've won 9 in a row, but in road games for the US in the President's Cup history, there have been 6 of them, and the US lost the first one. That was in 1998, the first time, and the only time the international team has won outright. In the second event, on the road for the US. They tied in 2003, and in all 4 other road games for the USA in the President's Cup, they have won, and they have won by fewer than 6 points. So if those trends hold, you're in a great spot. Also, the general spread, if you will, this week for the President's Cup is 3.5 points. The US is favored by. I found on DraftKings that you can get the international team plus 3.5 points at even money plus 100. So that is the first bet that I made this week. I'm betting it small just for a half unit, but I like the chances of the international team covering on home soil. If you look at over the 6 home games for the international team, they've covered this number 3.5, 4 out of 6 times. I like that they have the home field advantage, which, as we noted, comes with the fans. It comes with being able to set the course. I love that advantage, and obviously choosing the course. And I think that it's just tough to play on the road unless you're the Stanford Cardinal in the ACC. Never been defeated on the road. What happens this week at Clemson? I'll be there. May not matter, but it's going to be tough. And I like the chances of the international team rallying. I know that they're overmatched on paper, so I think that your bet, Spencer, is very savvy in picking the US. I also think that the US, by choosing Max Homa, I don't think that was a great pick. I think there were a lot of golfers I would have picked before Max Homa right now. And Billy Horschel making an argument this weekend at Wentworth that he should have been on that team. I certainly agree. So I agree with you, Spencer. I don't think that the US is going to run out the optimal groups or the optimal pairings every day. And I think it's going to be very important, especially because when you look at the format, unlike the Ryder Cup, where you have just Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and it's a sprint, you start on Thursday, and instead of there being 4 matches the first day, there are 5 matches, and there are 5 matches the second day as well. So it'll be 4 ball, aka best ball, on Thursday, 5 matches. Then on Friday, 5 foursomes matches, also known as alternate shot, and then there will also be on Saturday 4 4-ball matches and 4 foursomes, and then of course the 12 Sunday singles. I like the chances of the international team being able to rally. I also think that putting might be. So I think there's variance in putting, obviously. I think that might be something that helps the internationals. And also, they're on literally home soil. So a lot of guys who putt better on bent POA surfaces, I think that might be a little bit of an advantage. Whereas you don't have a Bermuda Burns or a Henley on their preferred surface, although those 2 guys are specifically Burns is still a great putter. So my first bet was international team plus 3.5. Nick, what was your first bet?
It was Russell Henley plus 850 to be the top rookie scorer. I feel like, again, I didn't model this anywhere near like Spencer did. This is something that I kind of just went pen and paper and took notes on what he's betting and what you're betting too. I think we talked a little bit before the show. I'm only worried about Wyndham Clark there. I feel like he's probably the best course fit in terms of like the bomb and gouge situation and can get really hot with the putter. Sure, Thigala could do that too, but we'll see how he, plays in this type of environment. So at 850, I feel like there's a lot of value on that ticket. But I'm a Russell Henley truther for all those listening, and certainly I'm betting him with my heart. But to see him as a long shot like Mackenzie Hughes being 350 points less is alarming to me. I know it's in Canadian soil and all that, but give me Russ at plus 850.
And
Be the
Nick,
top rookie scorer.
I want to give some context here. So this is top rookie scorer. There are only 6 rookies. So
Yep.
Wyndham Clark is plus 200, Brian Harmon's plus 330, Sahith Theegala is plus 400, Mackenzie Hughes is plus 500, Minwoo Lee is plus 750, and last on the board, Russell Henley plus 850. By the way, according to Data Golf, the top golfer among these is Russell Henley at 7th in the Data Golf model. In Spencer's model, Russell Henley is 4th this week, and none of the other golfers in this market are among the top 10 in Spencer's sheet. So I think there's a lot to like there. Nick and I were talking about this, how we both liked it, and then Spencer comes on, and the first golfer he mentions is Russell Henley. We don't discuss these things before the pod normally. They just happen sometimes. So I'm riding with you on Russell Henley. And one thing that I like about the format where there are 5 matches instead of 4. So 10 golfers are going to play each day on Thursday and Friday out of your 12 on the team. I think Russell Henley has to be among the 10 at least during alternate shot on Friday, and I would think he should be there on Thursday as well for four ball. So give me Russell Henley. I think he's awesome, specifically in alternate shot. In foursomes, I want to back Russell Henley given his driving accuracy, and in foursomes, alternate shot, I want to back the team with the higher floor. Whereas in best ball, I'm more willing to take a shot on the underdogs, given that you have more golf balls in play.
The upside.
And there's upside. So I like Russell Henley plus 850 in this market as well, given once again, there are only 6 players and 2 of them are on the international team. So I like the chances of Henley, given that he's an American and in theory, the stronger team here. I think he should be probably closer to 6-1. Spencer, what do you think about this market?
I, for the most part, do not want to bet Americans in markets for the reasons I talked about at the very top. Like, this is not a rookie market here that I like your bet, Nick. I will preface it with that. I like it a lot. Where I don't want to get stuck is where we get the situation where we bet Russell Henley to be the top point scorer for the US team or the top point scorer overall. This is where my concerns end up entering the fray. I just don't know if he plays enough. Now,
Right.
Of the 6 players that we just talked about, with him being one of them, every single one of those options has the same exact issue as Henley's going to have, to where we're not going to see likely any of them in all 5 matches. We'll see. I mean, I guess there's a chance Mackenzie Hughes on home soil, they roll him out if he gets hot. But for the most part, I don't think we're going to get all of these names or any of these names in all 5 matches. And then it just so happens that if you look at Harman, Thegal, those are 2 names I already talked about, Min Woo on the opposite end of it, those are 3 of my more substantial fade candidates that I am trying to take on this week. So if you could guarantee me everybody would get the same amount of matches here, which is obviously a stretch because we don't know where we're going to land, I think Russell Henley should be the favorite. I think he's the best golfer of this group. I agree with Nick. Wyndham Clark would be the second name. I think he's the next best option, and there's a lot to like about him on this course. But outside of Henley and Clark, I don't really want exposure to any of those other golfers. So I will tell you on that one, Nick. I think that's a very savvy way to try to get exposure to an American player, and by doing it in a market that is a little bit different than most people would want to go.
Yeah, I'm not like super sold on Wyndham Clark. Otherwise, like I would take him too and kind of do what you did with taking USA, up to 3 and then 4 to 6. Like, because there is a lot of variance in that, but like Wyndham Clark is the guy I'm scared of in this market to beat Russ there.
Nick, any other bets that you have this week or ones that you're eyeing?
Well, that is all I got. I think I'm going to ride Spencer on the 1 to 3 and 4 to 6. As much as I want to take the internationals plus 3.5, I am an American and I have to back America here.
I would love to see America get blown out this week, so that I can absolutely drop the hammer on them to win next year in the Ryder Cup, because it's going to happen and I don't want to lay too much juice. Spencer, any other bets you have for us this week?
Corey Connors 9-1 to be the top international scorer. I also took Ben On at 16-1 to be the top international scorer. Those are the markets where I like the volatility. The American side is, we know the pairings. There's a lot less that's known about this international team. So I want to bet on the ball striking answer of those 2 and hope that if they win and play, which I think Connors will, Ben On's a different answer, but if they play on Thursday, all of a sudden they could get more matches in.
Matchups will drop 30 minutes before the first tee time. You can follow us on X or Twitter. Nick is at Sticks Picks. Spencer is at Tee Off Sports, and I am at Roberto A213.